I was carrying a dying woman through a blizzard when the wolves found us, 8 of them. Their eyes glowed yellow in the darkness, reflecting the little moonlight that pierced through the storm. I had 2 choices that night: drop her and run, or fight with my bare hands while holding 120 pounds of unconscious schoolteacher against my chest. I chose wrong, or maybe I chose right for the first time in my life. They call me the mountain ghost. Not because I haunt these peaks, but because for 5 years I had been living like a man already dead, just too stubborn to lie down. My name is Garrett Stone. I am 32 years old. I stand 8 feet tall in my worn leather boots, and I have spent half a decade running from a world that sees me as either a curiosity or a monster. But that night, October 28, 1884, I stopped running. The storm had come early that year. The old-timers in Pine Hollow, the town 2 miles down the mountain from my cabin, had been predicting it for weeks. They read the signs in the way the birds flew south with unusual urgency, in the nervous stamping of horses in their stalls, in the peculiar thickness of the morning fog that settled in the valleys. I had learned to read these mountains the way my mother had taught me. Mourning Dove, my Cherokee mother, had died 5 winters ago from consumption, but her lessons lived on in the way I moved through these woods, in the way I could predict weather patterns by the behavior of animals, in the way I survived alone. That afternoon I had been checking my trap lines 3 miles from my cabin when the first snowflakes began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle flurries transformed into a howling tempest. The temperature plummeted to 20 degrees below zero. The wind screamed through the trees with such force that branches cracked and fell around me like artillery fire. I knew I had perhaps an hour before the trails became completely impassable. I was less than a mile from home when I heard it, a sound that made me stop dead in my tracks. Horses' frightened whinny, coming from the direction of the main trail that led up from town. Then, fainter, almost lost in the roar of the wind, a woman's cry for help. My first instinct was to keep walking. 5 years of isolation had taught me that involving myself in the problems of townfolk only led to complications. They feared me. They whispered about the giant half-breed who lived alone on the mountain. Mothers used me as a cautionary tale to frighten their children into obedience. Decent people crossed the street when they saw me coming during my rare trips to town for supplies. But that cry for help pierced through my carefully constructed walls of indifference. It was desperate. It was weakening. It was the sound of someone who knew they were going to die. I changed direction, moving toward the sound with long, ground-eating strides. My height, usually a burden in the cramped spaces of civilization, became an advantage in the deep snow. Where a normal-sized man would have been hip-deep and struggling, my powerful legs carried me forward with relative ease. The snow was already 2 feet deep and accumulating fast. I found the horse first. A brown mare trembling with fear and cold, reins trailing in the snow. The animal was saddled, which meant a rider somewhere nearby. I scanned the white landscape, my dark eyes searching for any sign of movement in the swirling chaos of the storm. Then I saw her. A dark shape against the snow, barely visible 20 yards off the trail. A woman's cloak, dark blue wool already half buried in the white drifts. I reached her in 4 long strides. She was unconscious. Her face was pale as the snow around her lips already taking on a dangerous blue tint. She was small, perhaps 5 feet 4 inches, with brown hair escaping from beneath her bonnet. There was a scar on her left cheek, a thin white line that spoke of some old injury. Her right leg was bent at an unnatural angle, broken. She must have been thrown from her horse and unable to remount. For a moment I hesitated. If I took her to my cabin, she would know where I lived. She would see me up close. She would wake up and scream, like they always did when they saw the giant up close in an enclosed space. She would tell the townfolk about the mountain ghost's lair, and whatever fragile peace I had found in my isolation would be shattered. But then the wind shifted, and I saw her face more clearly. Something in her features reminded me of my mother. Not in any specific way, but in the quality of determination I could see even in her unconscious state. The set of her jaw, the calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work, the simple, practical clothing of a woman who valued function over fashion. My mother's last words echoed in my mind. She had gripped my hand with what little strength remained in her wasting body and whispered, "Garrett, you are not a monster. You are a protector. Do not waste your gift hiding from the world." I had not believed her then. I had spent the 5 years since her death proving her wrong, hiding on this mountain, avoiding all human contact except for my quarterly trips to town for essential supplies. But as I looked down at this dying woman, I heard my mother's voice again, as clear as if she were standing beside me in the storm. I made my choice. I scooped the woman up in my arms, marveling at how light she felt. I had grown so accustomed to my own strength that I sometimes forgot how fragile normal people were. I cradled her against my chest, tucking her head beneath my chin to shield her face from the wind. My own coat, made from bear hide I had tanned myself, was large enough to wrap partially around her as well. I turned toward home and began to run. The cabin was only a mile away, but it was the longest mile of my life. The storm had intensified to the point where I could barely see 10 feet ahead. I navigated by instinct and memory, knowing every tree, every boulder, every dip in the terrain. The woman in my arms was so still that twice I had to stop and check that she was still breathing. Each time, I felt the faint warmth of her breath against my neck and continued on. I was perhaps a quarter mile from safety when I heard the growl, low, deep, hungry. I stopped. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head. 8 pairs of yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness, spread out in a semicircle behind me. Wolves, a full pack. They had been following us, drawn by the scent of vulnerability, waiting for the right moment to attack. The largest wolf, the alpha, took a step forward. It was massive, perhaps 150 pounds of muscle and fang, its lips pulled back in a snarl that showed teeth designed for tearing flesh. The pack began to close in, moving with the coordinated precision of experienced hunters. I could not fight them, not while holding the woman. If I set her down, even for a moment, she would freeze to death before I could finish the battle. If I ran, they would chase us down. Wolves could run faster than any man, even one with legs as long as mine. I had one option. I drew in the deepest breath my barrel chest could hold. Then I opened my mouth and roared. It was not a human sound. It was the bellow of a grizzly bear defending its territory, mixed with a Cherokee war cry my mother had taught me, amplified by lungs that could fill with twice the air of a normal man. The sound echoed off the mountains, rolling through the forest like thunder. Snow shook loose from tree branches. The very air seemed to vibrate with the force of it. I stomped my foot, driving it into the frozen ground with enough force to crack the ice beneath the snow. The impact sent a shockwave through the earth. I did it again and again, creating a rhythm like war drums, each impact accompanied by another roar that spoke of size and strength and the willingness to defend what I held. The wolves hesitated. In the natural world, size matters, noise matters, confidence matters. A creature that could make sounds like that could shake the earth with its footfalls, was not prey. It was a threat. The alpha took a step back, then another. The pack followed its lead, melting back into the storm, deciding that easier meals waited elsewhere in the mountains. I did not wait to see if they would change their minds. I ran the final quarter mile to my cabin as if the hounds of hell were at my heels. The cabin appeared through the swirling snow like a promise of salvation. I had built it myself over the course of 2 years, using logs from trees I had felled and shaped with my own hands. It was larger than most cabins, built to accommodate my size, with a ceiling high enough that I did not have to duck beneath the beams. The door was reinforced oak, heavy enough to require both hands to open under normal circumstances. I kicked it open and stumbled inside, snow and wind following me in a chaotic swirl. I managed to turn and slam the door shut with my shoulder, then dropped the heavy bar into place to secure it against the storm. For a moment I just stood there, breathing hard, the woman still cradled in my arms. My cabin was cold, the fire having burned down to coals in the hours I had been gone. But it was shelter. It was safety. I carried the woman to my bed, the only bed in the single-room cabin. Gently, as if she were made of spun glass, I laid her down on the thick bear fur blankets. She did not stir. I worked quickly. First, the fire. I stoked the coals and added kindling, blowing gently until flames leaped to life. Then, larger pieces of wood, building the fire until heat began to radiate into the room. I filled my largest pot with snow and hung it over the fire to melt for warm water. Then I turned my attention to the woman. Her wet cloak had to come off first. The wool had absorbed snow and was now a sodden, freezing mass that was leaching what little warmth remained from her body. I removed it carefully, then her bonnet. Her hair tumbled free, longer than I had expected, a rich brown shot through with hints of copper in the firelight. Her dress was damp but not soaked through. I debated removing it but decided against it. I was a stranger. She was unconscious. There were lines a decent man did not cross, even to save a life. Instead, I covered her with every blanket I owned, building layers of wool and fur that would trap her body heat and slowly, safely, bring her temperature back up. Her broken leg needed attention. I had set bones before, on myself and on injured animals. The process was the same. I cut away the fabric of her dress around the injury, revealing a leg that was already swelling and discolored. The break was clean, I could tell that much. The bone had not punctured the skin. That was good. It meant less risk of infection. I prepared splints from straight pieces of wood I kept for carving. Then, as gently as my large hands could manage, I set the bone. I felt it click back into alignment. The woman moaned softly but did not wake. I bound the splints in place with strips of clean cloth, wrapping them firmly but not so tight as to cut off circulation. While the water heated, I examined her more closely. She was older than I had first thought. Not young, perhaps in her late 30s. Her hands bore the calluses of work, but they were a teacher's hands, I realized. Ink stains on her fingers, a slight curve to her right index finger from years of holding a pen. Her clothing, while simple, was of good quality and well-maintained. A woman of modest means but strong character. I found a small leather satchel that had been slung across her body beneath the cloak. Inside were papers, lesson plans written in a neat, precise hand, notes about students, arithmetic problems, a well-worn copy of McGuffey's Reader. She was a schoolteacher. When the water was warm, I used clean cloths to gently wash her hands and face, removing the dirt and blood from a small cut on her temple that I had not noticed before. It was not serious, already clotted. I cleaned it anyway, then applied a poultice of herbs my mother had taught me to use for preventing infection. All of this I did by the light of my fire and 2 oil lamps. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the cabin like living things seeking entry. Snow piled against the windows. The temperature inside slowly climbed from frigid to merely cold to almost warm. The woman slept through it all. Her breathing grew stronger. The blue tint faded from her lips, replaced by a healthier pink. I checked her pulse regularly, my enormous fingers gentle on her delicate wrist. Steady, growing stronger. It was past midnight when I finally allowed myself to rest. I sat in my chair near the fire, the only chair in the cabin, built to support my weight. From there I could watch both the fire and the woman, making sure neither went out. I should have been exhausted. I had faced a blizzard, fought off wolves, carried an injured woman a mile through the worst storm in recent memory, and spent hours in intensive medical care. But I was not tired. I was alert, watchful, protective. I looked at her sleeping face, peaceful now in the warmth and safety of the cabin. I noticed small details, the way her eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks in the firelight. The small lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of a woman who smiled often, the strength in her features, even in repose. I wondered who she was, what had brought her up the mountain in the face of an approaching storm, whether she had family waiting for her, worried sick by now, whether anyone would think to look for her up here in the domain of the mountain ghost. I wondered what she would think when she woke and saw me. Would she scream? Would she recoil in horror? Would she see a monster or a man? Out of habit, when worry made my hands restless, I reached for a piece of wood and my carving knife. The wood was pine, soft and forgiving. The knife was an extension of my hand, as familiar as breathing. I began to carve without conscious thought, letting my hands work while my mind wandered. My mother had taught me to carve when I was 7 years old. I had already been larger than other children my age, my hands big and clumsy, prone to breaking things by accident. She had placed a knife and a piece of wood in my hands and said, "Garrett, you have been given hands that can crush stone. I will teach you to use them to create beauty. Then you will know you are meant to build, not destroy." For 25 years, I had been carving, small animals mostly, bears and wolves and eagles. The walls of my cabin were lined with shelves holding hundreds of carved figures, a wooden menagerie that kept me company in my isolation. I sold some in town, trading them for supplies. People were willing to buy my carvings, even if they feared the man who made them. Tonight, I carved a bird. I was not sure what kind at first. My hands seemed to know before my mind did. Small, delicate. Wings spread as if in flight. A songbird, I realized, the kind that filled the forest with music in spring. I carved for hours until the bird took form, until every feather was defined, until it seemed ready to fly from my palm. When it was finished, I held it up to the firelight, examining it critically. It was good work, perhaps the best I had done. I set it on the small table beside the bed where the woman would see it when she woke. A gift, a peace offering, a way of saying, "I am not what you think I am." The storm continued through the night. Wind rattled the shutters. Snow piled higher against the walls. Inside, the fire crackled and popped. The woman slept. And I kept watch, a giant guardian in a small cabin, protecting a stranger from the cold and dark. As dawn approached, gray and dim through the storm, I found myself thinking about my mother's words. "You are a protector," she had said. For 5 years, I had rejected that idea. I had protected nothing but my own solitude. I had used my strength for nothing but survival. But tonight, I had protected someone. I had used my size and strength to save a life rather than simply endure my own. And for the first time since my mother's death, I felt something other than the hollow ache of loneliness. I felt purpose. The woman stirred as the weak morning light began to filter through the windows. Her eyelids fluttered. Her hand moved slightly beneath the blankets. I sat very still, hardly breathing, watching as consciousness slowly returned to her. Her eyes opened. They were hazel, I noticed, green and brown and gold, all mixed together. Confusion clouded them at first as she stared at the ceiling, trying to remember where she was and how she had gotten there. Then her gaze found me. I braced myself for the scream, for the terror, for the revulsion. I had seen it before, that moment when people truly registered my size, when their minds struggled to reconcile what they were seeing with their concept of human proportions, but the scream never came. She looked at me for a long moment, her hazel eyes moving from my face to my shoulders to the hands resting on my knees, each one large enough to palm her head like a melon. I saw surprise in her expression, wonder even, but not fear. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse from the cold and from hours of sleep, but it was steady. "Where am I?" "My cabin," I said. My own voice sounded strange to my ears. I had not spoken to another person in months. "You were caught in the storm. I found you." She processed this information slowly. "You saved my life." It was not a question, but I nodded anyway. "Thank you." She tried to sit up, then gasped as pain shot through her leg. I was on my feet instantly, crossing the small distance between us in one stride. "Your leg is broken," I said. "You need to stay still." She looked down at the splint, then back at me. "You said it?" "Yes." "Are you a doctor?" "No, but I have some experience with injuries." She was quiet for a moment, studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable because I feared her judgment, but because I found myself caring what she thought. That was new, unsettling. "I am Abigail," she said finally. "Abigail Hartley. I teach at the school in Pine Hollow." "Garrett Stone." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "The mountain ghost." I flinched at the name, but she continued before I could respond. "They say you are dangerous, that you avoid people because you hate them." "And what do you say?" She looked around the cabin, taking in the carved animals on the shelves, the neatly organized tools, the careful medical supplies laid out on the table, the bird I had carved for her sitting beside the bed. Her gaze returned to me. "I say the man who saved my life, who set my broken leg with such care, who carved me a bird while I slept, does not seem very dangerous to me." Something loosened in my chest. Some knot of tension I had been carrying for so long that I had forgotten it was there. "You should rest," I managed to say. "The storm will not pass for days. You will need to stay here until it is safe to travel." "Days?" She paled slightly. "The storm came early and hard. Based on the wind and temperature, I would estimate at least a week before the trails are passable." A week? She processed this, and I could see her mind working through the implications. A single woman staying alone in a cabin with a man she did not know, the scandal it would cause if anyone found out, the damage to her reputation. "I have nowhere else to put you," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "This is a one-room cabin, but I will sleep by the fire. You will have the bed. You will be safe here. I give you my word." She looked at me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. It was a small smile, tentative but real. "I believe you, Mr. Stone, though I do have one request." "What is it?" "Please call me Abigail. If we are to be roommates for a week, we might as well be on a first-name basis." "Abigail," I repeated. The name felt strange on my tongue, foreign, intimate. "Then you must call me Garrett." "Garrett?" she said, testing the name. "It suits you." She picked up the wooden bird from the table beside the bed, turning it over in her hands with a gentleness that told me she understood the value of handcrafted things. "This is beautiful work," she said. "Did you really make this for me?" I nodded, suddenly shy. "Why?" I thought about how to answer that, because I wanted to show you I was more than the monster you had heard about, because I needed you to see that these hands could create as well as destroy, because in the hours I had watched you sleep, I had felt something shift inside me, some ice around my heart beginning to thaw, but I could not say any of that. So instead I said simply, "I wanted you to have something to remember that you survived." She looked at me with those hazel eyes, and I felt as if she could see right through me, past the size and the scars and the carefully constructed walls, straight to the lonely man beneath. "Thank you, Garrett," she said softly. "I will treasure it." Outside, the storm raged on. Snow piled higher against the windows. The wind howled like wolves at the door. But inside the cabin, something fragile and precious had begun to grow. Neither of us knew it yet, but that wooden bird would become a symbol, a reminder of the night everything changed, the night the mountain ghost stopped hiding and started living, the night a teacher learned that the most important lessons are not found in books, but in the courage to see people as they truly are, not as fear tells us they should be. The storm would last 7 days. In that time, 2 lonely people would learn to trust again, to hope again, to feel again. But that night, as Abigail drifted back to sleep holding the carved bird, and as I settled into my chair by the fire, we were simply 2 strangers sharing shelter from the cold. Sometimes that is how the greatest stories begin, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with small kindnesses offered in the darkness, with a stranger choosing to help rather than walk away, with a woman choosing to trust rather than fear. The first chapter of our story was written that night in firelight and storm. The rest would unfold in the days to come, one moment at a time, one conversation at a time, one shared meal and quiet evening at a time. But already, though neither of us would admit it for weeks yet, something had shifted. The trajectory of two lives had changed course, pulled together by forces neither of us fully understood. Fate, perhaps. Or simply two people who had been alone too long, recognizing in each other the possibility of something more than mere survival. The possibility of connection, of understanding, of a future neither had dared to imagine. The storm continued, and we waited together for the dawn. The storm did not relent. If anything, it intensified on the second day, as if the mountains themselves had decided to test our resolve. The wind screamed like a living thing, throwing snow against the cabin walls with such force that the entire structure shuddered. Drifts piled 8 feet high against the north wall. The temperature dropped so low that the water in my bucket froze solid despite being only 3 feet from the fire. Abigail woke on that second morning to find me already awake, stoking the fire and preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge and dried venison. I had not slept much. The chair by the fire was not uncomfortable, but I had spent most of the night listening to the storm and watching Abigail sleep, making sure her breathing remained steady, that no fever developed from her injuries. "Good morning," she said, her voice stronger than it had been the day before. I turned from the fire, ladle in hand. "Good morning. How is your leg?" "It hurts," she admitted, "but not as badly as yesterday. You did good work setting it." I learned from necessity. When you live alone on a mountain, you become your own doctor. She pushed herself up to a sitting position, wincing slightly at the movement. I noticed she still held the wooden bird I had carved, clutching it like a talisman. The sight stirred something in my chest, though I could not name what. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. 5 years, since my mother died. I am sorry for your loss." I ladled porridge into 2 wooden bowls, one regular-sized for her, one twice as large for myself. She had consumption. There was nothing to be done. The doctor in town tried, but the disease had progressed too far by the time we sought help. "Were you close?" I brought her bowl to the bedside, along with a spoon I had carved from birch wood. "She was all I had. My father left when I was 3 years old. Took one look at his oversized infant son and decided he wanted no part of raising what he called a half-breed freak." I had not meant to say that last part. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. It had been 30 years since my father's abandonment, but apparently some wounds never fully healed. Abigail's expression softened with understanding rather than pity, and I was grateful for that. Pity I could not stomach. Understanding was something else entirely. "My mother was Cherokee," I continued, settling into my chair with my own bowl. "Morning Dove was her name. She taught me everything. How to read the weather, how to track animals, how to survive in these mountains, how to carve wood so my hands would learn gentleness instead of only knowing strength." She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She used to say I was not a monster, just a man who grew too fast for the world to keep up with. I paused, stirring my porridge without eating. I did not believe her when she was alive. I am still not sure I believe her now. What do you believe? The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me that before. What I believed about myself, about the world, about anything that mattered. "I believe," I said slowly, thinking through each word, "that people see what they expect to see. They look at me and see something that does not fit into their understanding of normal, so they make me into a story. The mountain ghost, the gentle giant, the dangerous half-breed, whatever narrative makes them feel safe. And what do you see when you look at yourself?" I met her hazel eyes across the small cabin. "I see a man who has been hiding for 5 years because it is easier than facing rejection again and again. That is honest. Honesty is all I have up here. There is no one to lie to except myself." We ate in comfortable silence for a while. The porridge was simple but filling, sweetened with a bit of honey I had traded for in town. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside we had warmth and food and unexpectedly, companionship. "What about you?" I asked eventually. "You said you're a teacher? Have you been in Pine Hollow long?" 10 years, she said. "I came here after my husband died. I am sorry." "Thank you. Thomas was a good man. We had only been married 2 years when he caught the plague. It swept through Boston in the summer of '74. Half the city fell ill. Thomas was one of those who did not recover." "Boston," I said. "That is a long way from West Virginia." I needed to get away from the memories. A friend knew of a teaching position opening in Pine Hollow. I applied, was accepted, and started a new life as far from my old one as I could manage. "Do you regret it?" She considered the question seriously, gazing into her porridge as if it held answers. "No. Teaching gives me purpose. The children here need education, and I am good at providing it. I have built a life here. It may not be the life I imagined when I was young, but it is mine." There was something in her tone, a note of resignation mixed with determination, that I recognized. We were alike in that way, I realized. Both of us had lost someone important and responded by retreating into isolation. Mine was physical, up on this mountain. Hers was emotional, buried in work and routine. "You never remarried?" I asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. "Forgive me, that is not my business." "It is all right," she said. "The answer is no. I never remarried. At first I was too consumed by grief. Then too much time had passed and I had grown accustomed to my independence. The men in town who showed interest wanted a housekeeper or a mother for their children, not a partner. I decided I would rather be alone than settle for less than what I had with Thomas." "That is admirable." "Is it? Or is it just another form of hiding?" The question hung between us, unanswered, because we both knew the truth. We were two people who had learned to survive alone and had mistaken survival for living. The days that followed fell into a pattern. I would wake before dawn and tend the fire, prepare breakfast, check Abigail's leg for signs of infection or improper healing. She would tell me stories about her students, about the funny things children said, about the challenges of teaching 20 students of different ages in a one-room schoolhouse. I would listen, carving while she talked, my hands always needing something to do. On the third day, I taught her to carve. Her hands were small and delicate compared to mine, but they were strong from years of writing on blackboards and carrying armloads of books. I placed a piece of soft pine in her palm and showed her how to hold the knife, how to cut with the grain rather than against it, how to let the wood tell her what it wanted to become. "I am terrible at this," she said, laughing, as her first attempt resulted in a lopsided blob that resembled no known animal. "You are learning," I corrected. "There is a difference." I moved my chair closer to the bed so I could guide her hands. When I wrapped my enormous fingers around her small ones to demonstrate the proper angle of the blade, I felt electricity run up my arm. She felt it too. I could tell by the way her breath caught, by the slight tremor in her hands. We both pretended we had not noticed. On the fourth day, she asked me to tell her about the carvings on my shelves. I took them down one by one, explaining the story behind each piece. The bear I had carved the winter my mother died, pouring my grief into the wood. The eagle I had made the day I decided to stop going into town except when absolutely necessary. The family of deer that represented the family I had never had. "You put your heart into these," she observed, running her finger along the curve of a wolf's back. "Wood remembers what you were feeling when you carved it," I said. "My mother taught me that. If you carve in anger, the piece will be harsh. If you carve in sorrow, it will be melancholy. If you carve in love, well, it will show that too." "What were you feeling when you carved my bird?" I looked at the small songbird, still sitting on the table beside her bed where she had placed it each morning after sleeping with it clutched in her hand. "Hope," I admitted. For the first time in 5 years, I was feeling hope. On the 5th day, Abigail insisted on helping with the chores despite my protests. She could not walk on her broken leg, but she could sit at the table and help prepare vegetables for soup, could fold the blankets, could read aloud to me from the book she had been carrying in her satchel while I worked. Her voice filled the cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She read poetry, Wordsworth and Keats, verses about nature and beauty and the sublime. I had never heard poetry read aloud before. My mother had taught me to read, but books had been scarce in our household. Listening to Abigail transform written words into music was a revelation. "You have a beautiful voice," I told her when she paused to rest. "Thank you. I read to my students every day. It is important that they hear language used well, not just see it written on a page." "You love teaching." "I do. There is something miraculous about watching a child's face when they finally understand a concept they have been struggling with. That moment when everything clicks into place and you can see their whole world expand. You speak of it the way I think about carving. Perhaps we are not so different, you and I, both of us creating something beautiful from raw materials. You shape wood, I shape minds." I had never thought of it that way, but she was right. We were both craftsmen in our own ways, both dedicated to our work, both finding purpose in creation. On the 6th day, the temperature dropped even further. The fire, which I had been keeping steadily burning, was not enough to fully heat the cabin. I could see Abigail shivering despite the pile of blankets covering her. I added more wood to the fire, but there was only so much the small stone hearth could do against the brutal cold seeping through the walls. "I am going to need to check the firewood supply," I told her as evening approached. "We are burning through it faster than I anticipated." "Is there enough?" "For tonight, yes. But if this cold continues, we may need to ration." That night the temperature plummeted to 20 degrees below zero. I woke around midnight to find the fire burning low and Abigail shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. I immediately added more wood, building the fire as high as I dared without risking a chimney fire. "Garrett," she called softly, "I am so cold." I went to her side. Even with every blanket I owned piled on top of her, she was trembling. Her lips had a faint blue tinge. I touched her hand and found it ice cold. "The blankets are not enough," I said. "What do we do?" I knew what needed to be done. I had read about it in a book on wilderness survival. When hypothermia threatened, when blankets and fire were not sufficient, the most effective method was skin-to-skin contact, shared body heat. But the implications of such an action with an unmarried woman were enormous. "There is a way," I said carefully, "but it requires trust. I trust you. You might not, after I explain. The fastest way to warm someone suffering from cold is direct body contact. I would need to lie beside you, hold you, share my warmth. It is a medical necessity, nothing more, but I understand if you are not comfortable with that." She looked at me for a long moment. I could see her weighing the options, the physical danger of freezing against the social danger of impropriety. "Do it," she said finally. "I trust you, Garrett Stone." I climbed onto the bed, which groaned under my weight. The bed frame was sturdy, built to support me, but it had never held two people before. I lay down beside her on top of the blankets initially, trying to maintain some layer of separation. "It will not work like this," she said, her voice shaking from the cold. "You need to be under the blankets, and I need to be closer to you. This is not about propriety anymore, Garrett. This is about survival." She was right. I slid under the blankets and carefully, slowly, put my arm around her. She immediately pressed herself against my chest, seeking heat. I could feel how cold she was through the thin fabric of her dress. Without thinking, I wrapped both arms around her, pulling her close, letting my body heat begin to warm her. She was so small against me. The top of her head barely reached my chin. I could feel every shiver that ran through her body, could feel the cold of her hands as she tucked them against my chest. Gradually, slowly, her shaking began to subside. "You are warm," she murmured against my chest, "like a furnace." My size has some advantages. We lay like that for an hour, maybe more. I felt her body gradually warm, felt her breathing slow and deepen as the immediate crisis passed. But I did not move away, and she did not ask me to. "Garrett," she said softly. "Yes?" "Thank you, not just for this, for everything, for saving my life, for taking care of me, for seeing me as a person, not just an inconvenience or a burden. You are not a burden, Abigail. I know. That is what makes this so strange. I have not felt this safe, this cared for in 10 years. I tightened my arms around her slightly. I have not felt this useful, this needed, in 5 years. She tilted her head back to look at me. In the firelight, her hazel eyes seemed to glow. We were close, closer than we had ever been. I could feel her breath on my face, could see every freckle on her nose, every line around her eyes. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "What is?" "This, us. The way I am starting to feel about you." My heart was pounding so hard I was certain she could feel it. "How are you starting to feel about me?" "Like maybe the storm brought me to you for a reason. Like maybe being stranded here was not bad luck, but the opposite. Like maybe I have been waiting my whole life to meet someone who sees me the way you do. Abigail, I am not the kind of man women dream about. I am too big, too different, too much of everything and not enough of what matters." "You are wrong. You are gentle and kind and talented. You saved my life without asking for anything in return. You have treated me with more respect in 6 days than most men show in a lifetime. You are exactly enough, Garrett Stone." The space between us seemed to shrink. I was not sure who moved first, whether I leaned down or she lifted up, but suddenly her lips were inches from mine. I could smell the honey from dinner on her breath, could see the pulse beating in her throat. "We should not," I said, my voice rough. "I know. People would say I took advantage, that I compromised you. I know that too. This could ruin your reputation, your position as a teacher. I know. Then why are we still moving closer?" "Because sometimes the right choice and the safe choice are not the same thing, and I am tired of always choosing safe." She closed the final distance between us and kissed me. It was not the first kiss I had ever received, but it was the first one that mattered. Her lips were soft and warm and tasted like honey and hope. I kissed her back carefully, afraid of my own strength, afraid of crushing something so delicate. But she was not delicate, I realized. She was steel wrapped in silk, strong enough to make her own choices and live with the consequences. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. "What have we done?" I whispered. "Something reckless," she said. "Something wonderful. Something that will change everything." She was right. We both knew it. Once you cross certain lines, there is no going back. The relationship between us had shifted irreversibly. We were no longer strangers sharing shelter. We were something else now, something neither of us had words for yet. That night, wrapped in each other's arms, we made a choice. Not a careless choice, not an impulsive one, but a deliberate decision to reach for connection despite the risks, to choose hope over fear, to believe that maybe, just maybe, two lonely people could build something beautiful together. When morning came, we would have to face the implications of what we had done. But that night, in the warm darkness of the cabin, while the storm raged outside, we simply held each other and let ourselves feel what we had been denying for 6 days. On the 7th day, the storm finally broke. I woke to silence so profound it was startling after a week of constant wind and snow. Sunlight streamed through the windows, bright and clean. Outside, the world was transformed into a landscape of pristine white, beautiful, and deadly in equal measure. Abigail woke in my arms. For a moment we just looked at each other, both of us knowing that with the storm's end came decisions that could no longer be postponed. "I should be able to take you back to town today," I said. "The trail will be difficult, but passable. I know. Your leg is healing well. In a few weeks, you will be able to walk normally again. Yes?" Neither of us mentioned the night before. Neither of us spoke of the line we had crossed or what it meant for the future. There was too much uncertainty, too many complications, too many ways this could go wrong. I fashioned a sled from wood and rope, something I could pull through the snow with Abigail riding on it. I packed her carefully in blankets and furs, making sure she would stay warm during the 2-mile journey down the mountain. Before we left, she tucked the wooden bird I had carved for her into her dress, close to her heart. "So I do not forget," she said simply. The journey down took 3 hours, slow and careful on the snow-packed trail. When we reached the edge of town, I stopped. This was as far as I could go. If I entered Pine Hollow with Abigail, the gossip would be immediate and brutal. A single woman spending a week alone with the mountain ghost, it would destroy her reputation. "I will leave you here," I said. "You can tell people you took shelter in an abandoned hunting cabin. No one needs to know about me. Garrett, I will not lie about what happened. You must, for your sake. Your position as a teacher depends on your reputation. If people know you stayed in my cabin, they will assume the worst. Let them assume what they want. I know the truth. You saved my life. You treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. I will not repay that by pretending you do not exist. Abigail, please, think about what you are saying. I have thought about nothing else since dawn. I am going to tell the truth. And more than that, I am going to wait." "Wait for what?" She looked at me with those hazel eyes that had become so dear to me in just 7 days. "You asked me to marry you once, on the 3rd night, remember? You said it jokingly, that you could not possibly be good husband material for someone like me. I am going to wait for you to ask again. And this time, I want you to mean it." My heart stopped. "Abigail, you cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious about anything in my life. I am 38 years old, Garrett. I have been alone for 10 years. I know what loneliness feels like, and I know what connection feels like. What we have is rare and precious. I'm not going to throw it away because society says we do not fit together. People will talk. They will say terrible things about both of us. Let them talk. I am done living my life for other people's approval." I climbed off the sled and knelt in the snow beside her, taking her small hands in my enormous ones. "If I ask you to marry me, it will not be because you spent a week in my cabin. It will not be because I feel obligated or because society demands it. It will be because I want to wake up every morning with you in my arms. Because I want to teach you to carve and listen to you read poetry. Because in 7 days you have made me feel more alive than I have in 5 years. Do you understand that? Yes? Then I need you to understand something else. I need time. Time to be sure this is what you really want, not just something born from gratitude or circumstance. Can you give me that?" She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I can give you 3 months. If at the end of 3 months you still want this, want us, then come down from your mountain and ask me properly. But Garrett, if you come, do not come just for duty. Come for me." 3 months, I repeated. 3 months. "And in the meantime, I want you to write to me. Tell me about your days, your thoughts, your carvings. Let us know each other with words before we make any final promises." It was wise, I realized. She was giving us both time to be certain, time to see if what we felt in the intensity of the storm could survive in the light of ordinary days. "I will write," I promised, "every week. And I will write back." I helped her down from the sled and fashioned a crutch from a sturdy branch to help her walk the final 100 yards into town. Before she left, she stood on her toes and kissed my cheek. "Thank you, Garrett Stone, for everything." Then she turned and hobbled toward town, toward her life and her students and her neat little house behind the schoolhouse. I watched until she was out of sight, then turned the sled around and began the long walk back up the mountain. The cabin felt emptier than it had in 5 years. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of her. The bed where she had slept, the chair where she had sat and read poetry, the table where we had shared meals. The very air seemed to hold the echo of her laughter. I sat in my chair by the fire and pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil. For a long moment I just stared at the blank page, trying to organize thoughts that had become jumbled and chaotic. Finally, I began to write. "Dear Abigail, you have been gone for 3 hours, and already the cabin feels like a tomb. I am not sure how I survived 5 years alone before you. Now that I know what companionship feels like, solitude has lost whatever comfort it once held. but you are right. We need time. Time to be certain that what grew between us in the storm can survive in the real world. Time for you to be sure you want a life with a man like me, with all the complications that would bring. I promise to write every week. I promise to tell you the truth, even when the truth is difficult. And in 3 months, if you still want me, I will come down from this mountain and ask you properly. Until then, know that you have my heart. Yours, Garrett. I folded the letter carefully and set it aside to mail when I next went to town. Then I picked up a piece of wood and my carving knife. My hands knew what to make before my mind did. A pair of birds this time. 2 songbirds, wings touching, taking flight together. Because some stories are meant to be shared, and some people are meant to find each other even when the whole world says they should not. The storm had passed. Spring would come. And in 3 months I would walk down this mountain and claim the future I had never dared to dream of. But first, I would wait. And I would carve. And I would write letters full of hope to a woman who had taught me that the greatest courage is not in hiding from life, but in reaching out and taking hold of it with both hands. The choice had been made. Now we would both have to live with the consequences, and somehow I knew we would be better for it. The letters began arriving at the Pine Hollow post office exactly 1 week after the storm ended. Every Monday without fail, a thick envelope addressed to Miss Abigail Hartley in careful, precise handwriting appeared in the mail slot. And every Monday Abigail would collect her letter, tuck it carefully into her satchel, and wait until she was alone in her small cottage behind the schoolhouse to read it. The first letter was 3 pages long, written on rough paper that Garrett must have made himself. He wrote about his daily routines, about the animals he saw from his cabin windows, about the progress he was making on a new carving. But beneath the ordinary details, Abigail could read the loneliness, the uncertainty, the hope he was afraid to fully express. She wrote back that same evening, telling him about her students, about the challenges of teaching on a healing leg, about how she had placed the wooden bird he had carved on her bedside table where she could see it first thing every morning and last thing every night. She told him about the whispers that had started in town, the suspicious looks from some of the parents, the questions about where exactly she had sheltered during the storm. She told him she had answered honestly, that she had been rescued by Garrett Stone, that he had saved her life, set her broken leg, and treated her with perfect propriety. She did not mention the kiss. Some truths were too precious to commit to paper that others might read. The second week, Garrett sent her a small carving wrapped in cloth. A fox, detailed down to every whisker, captured in mid-leap. The note attached said simply, "I carved this thinking of you, clever, resilient, beautiful." The third week, Abigail sent him a book of poetry she had ordered from a catalog. Whitman, this time, more American, more grounded in the earth and the body. She marked certain passages with slips of paper, poems about the soul and connection and the courage to love without apology. The fourth week, Garrett wrote about his mother, about memories he had never shared with anyone. He told Abigail about learning to carve, about his father's abandonment, about the loneliness of being different. He wrote, "You asked me once what I believed. I am starting to believe that maybe my mother was right. Maybe I am not a monster. Maybe I am just a man who needed to meet the right person to see himself clearly." By the 8th week, the letters had become more intimate. Abigail wrote about her marriage to Thomas, about the ways it had been good, but also limiting, about how she had loved him, but never felt truly seen by him. Garrett wrote about the fear that lived in his chest, the fear that he would come down the mountain and she would take one look at him in the full light of day, surrounded by normal-sized people, and realize she had made a terrible mistake. "You will not change your mind," she wrote back, "because I see you, Garrett Stone, not the size, not the mixed heritage, not the isolation. I see the man who carves beauty from wood, who saved a stranger without hesitation, who writes letters full of honesty and hope. That is the man I am waiting for." The 10th week brought the first real test. Victor Monroe, owner of the Monroe Mining Company, came to visit Abigail at the schoolhouse. He was a tall man in his mid-50s, distinguished-looking, with silver hair and expensive clothes. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Miss Hartley," he said, removing his hat as he entered her classroom after school had dismissed for the day. "I hope I am not intruding." "Mr. Monroe," she replied, setting down the papers she had been grading. Her leg had healed enough that she could walk with only a slight limp now. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to speak with you about a matter of some delicacy." "May I sit?" She gestured to one of the student desks, watching as he folded his tall frame into the small chair with obvious discomfort. "I understand," he began, "that you spent some time on the mountain during the storm last month, that you were rescued by the man they call the mountain ghost." Abigail felt her spine stiffen. "I was rescued by Mr. Garrett Stone, yes. He saved my life." "I am sure he did, and I am equally sure he was a perfect gentleman. But, Miss Hartley, surely you understand how such a situation appears to others. A single woman spending days alone with a man of questionable background and reputation." "There is nothing questionable about Mr. Stone's character," Abigail said, her voice cold. "He is a good man who has been unjustly ostracized by this community." Monroe leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Miss Hartley, Abigail, may I call you Abigail? I say this out of concern for your well-being. You are an educated woman, a valued member of this community. You teach our children. Your reputation must be above reproach." "My reputation is my own concern, Mr. Monroe." Of course, but I feel I must tell you something for your own protection. The school board has been discussing your situation. Some members are concerned about the example you are setting for the young ladies in your care. There has been talk of asking for your resignation." Abigail felt ice flood her veins. Teaching was not just her occupation, it was her identity, her purpose. The thought of losing it because of gossip and prejudice made her hands shake with anger. "On what grounds?" she demanded. "Moral turpitude," Monroe said, spreading his hands as if in apology. "I do not agree with it, you understand. I am merely reporting what others have said. But I may have a solution that would satisfy everyone." "What solution?" "Marry me." The words fell into the small classroom like stones into still water. Abigail stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me? I am a widower, as you know. My wife died 3 years ago. I have been looking for a suitable companion, someone intelligent and refined. You would make an excellent wife, Miss Hartley, and marriage to me would end all the gossip immediately. No one would dare question the morals of Mrs. Victor Monroe." "You are proposing marriage to protect my reputation?" "And because I hold you in high esteem," Monroe added quickly. "You would want for nothing. My home is large and comfortable. You could continue teaching if you wished, or you could retire to a life of leisure. I would be a generous husband." Abigail stood slowly, her leg protesting the sudden movement. "Mr. Monroe, I appreciate that you believe you are helping, but I must decline your offer." His face darkened. "Miss Hartley, I do not think you understand the seriousness of your situation. Without my protection, you will lose your position. You will be ruined. Then I will be ruined on my own terms, not saved by a marriage I do not want." "This is about the mountain ghost, is it not?" Monroe stood as well, his earlier politeness evaporating. "You have formed some kind of attachment to that half-breed freak. Miss Hartley, be reasonable. What kind of life could you have with a man like that? He lives in a cabin on a mountain. He has no prospects, no future, no place in civilized society. He has more honor in his smallest finger than you have in your entire body," Abigail said, her voice shaking with fury. "Now I must ask you to leave my classroom, Mr. Monroe. You are making a mistake that you will regret. That is my choice to make. Good day, sir." Monroe jammed his hat back on his head and stalked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Abigail sank back into her chair, her heart pounding. She had just made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the county. But she could not, would not, marry for convenience when her heart belonged to someone else. That night she wrote to Garrett about what had happened. She did not ask for his help or his protection. She simply told him the truth, as they had promised to always tell each other. His response came 3 days later, faster than usual. The letter was short, but intense. "Abigail, if this man threatens you again, I will come down from this mountain and deal with him myself. But you are right to refuse him. Marriage should be a choice made from love, not fear or convenience. I am proud of your courage, even as I worry for your safety. 2 more weeks. 10 more weeks. In 10 more weeks, the 3 months will be complete, and I will come to you. Hold on until then. I am coming. Hold on until then. I am coming." But Victor Monroe was not a man who accepted rejection gracefully. 3 days after his proposal, Abigail received a visit from Deputy Hosea Creed, a thick-set man in his 40s who wore his badge like a weapon. "Miss Hartley," he said, standing on her doorstep with his hat in his hands but no warmth in his eyes, "I need to ask you some questions about Garrett Stone." "What about him?" "There has been an accusation made. A man named Trenton Pike claims that Stone attacked him without provocation 2 weeks ago, left him with a broken nose and 3 cracked ribs." Abigail felt her stomach drop. "That is impossible. Mr. Stone has not come down from the mountain in weeks. I would know. We correspond regularly." "So you admit you are in contact with him?" "I am not admitting anything improper, Deputy. Mr. Stone saved my life. We have become friends. There is nothing illegal about correspondence between friends." "Friends," Creed repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of that explanation. "Miss Hartley, Pike is willing to testify under oath that Stone attacked him on the road to Cedar Ridge. He has witnesses." "Then those witnesses are lying, or they are mistaken. Mr. Stone would never attack someone without cause." "How can you be so sure? You barely know the man." "I know him well enough to know he is not violent." Creed put his hat back on, his expression hardening. "There is going to be a trial, Miss Hartley. Stone will need to appear before Judge Brennan in Cedar Ridge to answer these charges. If he does not appear, a warrant will be issued for his arrest. I thought you might want to pass that information along, seeing as you correspond regularly." After Creed left, Abigail sat at her small kitchen table and forced herself to think clearly. This was Monroe's doing, she was certain of it. He had been rebuffed, and this was his revenge. But how to prove it? She spent the next 3 days investigating. She spoke to shopkeepers in town, asking casual questions about Trenton Pike. She learned that Pike was a frequent visitor to Monroe's estate, that he was deeply in debt from gambling, that he had a reputation for doing odd jobs for people who needed something unsavory accomplished. She visited the doctor who had supposedly treated Pike's injuries. The doctor, an elderly man named Samuel Winters, was more forthcoming than she had expected. "Between you and me, Miss Hartley," he said quietly, "those injuries were not consistent with being attacked by a man of Stone's size. If a man 8 feet tall, with fists like hammers, had struck Pike, the damage would have been far more severe. These looked more like injuries Pike might have inflicted on himself, or had someone else inflict at his request. Would you be willing to testify to that, Dr. Winters?" The old man hesitated. "Monroe is a powerful man. Going against him could ruin my practice. And allowing an innocent man to be convicted of a crime he did not commit, what would that do to your conscience?" Dr. Winters sighed. "You are right, of course. If it comes to trial, I will tell the truth. But, Miss Hartley, be careful. Monroe does not take kindly to opposition." She was walking home from the doctor's office when she noticed she was being followed. A man she did not recognize, staying just far enough back to seem coincidental. When she turned onto the road leading to her cottage, he turned as well. Her heart began to race. It was late afternoon, the streets mostly empty as people prepared their evening meals. She was alone and vulnerable, her legs still not strong enough to run. She picked up her pace, her limp more pronounced as she tried to move faster. The man behind her matched her speed. She could hear his footsteps now, growing closer. She was 20 yards from her cottage when she heard a sound that made the man behind her stop abruptly, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Abigail turned to see Garrett step out from behind a building. He had come down from the mountain early, and he looked like fury incarnate. 8 feet of protective rage, his face carved from stone, his massive hands clenched into fists. "Walk away," Garrett said to the man, his voice low and dangerous. "Walk away now, or I will give you a reason to need Dr. Winter's services." The man took one look at Garrett and ran. Garrett waited until the man had disappeared around a corner, then turned to Abigail. His expression immediately softened. "Are you hurt?" "No, but Garrett, you should not be here. There is a warrant, an accusation. Monroe has set a trap." "I know. I received your letter. That is why I came early. I am not going to let you face this alone. But the trial, if you are seen in town, Creed will arrest you. Let him try. Abigail, I am done hiding. I am done letting fear control my life. You stood up for me when you did not have to. You risked your reputation, your position, everything. The least I can do is stand beside you when you need me." She wanted to argue, to tell him to go back to safety. But looking up at him, seeing the determination in his dark eyes, she knew it would be pointless. He had made his choice. "Then we face this together," she said. "Together," he agreed. That night they sat in Abigail's small cottage and made a plan. They would need evidence of Monroe's conspiracy. They would need witnesses willing to testify, and they would need to be prepared for whatever Monroe might try next. "There is something else I need to tell you," Garrett said as they worked by lamplight, organizing the information Abigail had gathered. "The reason Monroe wants my land. It is not just about driving me away. There is coal under the mountain, Abigail, a lot of it. A surveyor came through last year before the storm. He was working for Monroe, mapping mineral deposits. I caught him on my property and sent him away, but he had already found what he was looking for." "How much coal?" "Enough to make Monroe a very wealthy man, if he could mine it. But he cannot, because the land is mine. It was my mother's before that, left to her by her Cherokee grandfather. The deed is legal and clear. The only way Monroe can get that land is if I am convicted of a crime and the property is seized, or if I am driven away and he can claim it was abandoned. So this is not about morality or reputation at all. It is about greed. It always is with men like Monroe." Abigail looked at the papers spread across her table, at the evidence they had gathered, at the mountain of obstacles still ahead of them. Then she looked at Garrett, at this gentle giant who had risked everything to stand beside her. "We are going to win this," she said. "We are going to expose Monroe for what he is, clear your name, and build the life we want. Together." Garrett reached across the table and took her hand, his enormous fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. "I believe you," he said. "For the first time in my life, I believe that good things are possible." The next morning, Deputy Creed arrived at Abigail's cottage with 2 other men. They found Garrett sitting on the front step whittling a piece of wood, waiting. "Garrett Stone," Creed said, his hand on his pistol, "you are under arrest for assault and battery on Trenton Pike." "I know," Garrett said, calmly, standing to his full height. The 2 men with Creed took an involuntary step backward. "I am ready to face these charges, but I want it on record that I am surrendering voluntarily and that I have not resisted arrest in any way." "That is noted. Put your hands out." They had brought iron shackles, heavy chains meant for dangerous criminals. Creed fastened them around Garrett's wrists, and Abigail saw her future husband's jaw tighten at the indignity of it. "I will be at the trial," she told Garrett as they led him away. "I will find the truth, and I will make sure everyone hears it." "I know you will," he said, looking back at her with absolute trust in his eyes. "I am not afraid, Abigail. Not anymore." They took him to the small jail in Pine Hollow, a stone building with 3 cells. Garrett's size made it difficult to fit him through the door. They had to remove the shackles temporarily and have him duck and turn sideways to squeeze into the cell. Once inside, the space was barely large enough for him to stand upright. Abigail was allowed to visit that afternoon, bringing food and blankets. The sight of Garrett cramped in that tiny cell, his head nearly touching the ceiling, his shoulders too broad for the narrow cot, made her furious. "This is inhumane," she said to the guard, a young man named Timothy who had once been her student. "He needs a larger space." "These are the only cells we have, Miss Hartley," Timothy said apologetically. "I am sorry, but there is nothing I can do." Garrett shook his head at Abigail through the bars. "It is all right. I have endured worse. This is temporary. It should not be happening at all." Over the next week, Abigail worked tirelessly. She gathered statements from people who had seen Pike at Monroe's estate. She documented the timeline, proving that Garrett had not left his mountain during the period when the alleged attack occurred. She found the shopkeeper who had sold Pike a bottle of whiskey the morning after he claimed to have been attacked, who said Pike had seemed perfectly fine, no injuries visible. She also received an unexpected ally. Reverend Samuel Oakes, the elderly minister who had been preaching in Pine Hollow for 30 years, came to visit her. "Miss Hartley," he said, settling into the chair in her parlor, "I have been hearing disturbing things about the charges against Mr. Stone. I want you to know that I do not believe them for a moment." "Thank you, Reverend, but belief is not enough. We need proof. I may be able to help with that. I was visiting a parishioner who lives on the road to Cedar Ridge. She mentioned seeing Pike with 2 other men the day before he claimed to have been attacked. They were practicing falling down, as if rehearsing something. She thought it odd at the time but did not realize it might be relevant until she heard about the charges. Would she be willing to testify? I have already asked. She is frightened of Monroe, but she is more frightened of letting an innocent man be punished for a crime he did not commit. She will testify. The trial was scheduled for 2 weeks after Garrett's arrest, to be held in Cedar Ridge before Judge Cornelius Brennan. Brennan had a reputation as a fair man, incorruptible, which was why Monroe had probably tried to avoid having the case heard before him. But the jurisdiction was clear. The alleged attack had happened in Brennan's district, so Brennan would preside. The day before the trial, Abigail received a visit from Martha Brennan, the judge's wife. She was a woman in her 60s, kind-faced but with steel in her eyes. "Miss Hartley," she said, "my husband asked me to speak with you. He wanted you to know that he will judge this case on the evidence alone, without regard to Mr. Monroe's influence or wealth. He also wanted me to tell you something in confidence." "What is that?" Martha's expression grew sad. 20 years ago, my husband and I had a son, a good boy, honest and kind. He was accused of stealing from his employer, a wealthy merchant in Charleston. The accusation was false, manufactured because our son had discovered the merchant was embezzling from his own company. But the merchant had connections, money, power. Our son was convicted and hanged before we could prove his innocence. Abigail felt tears spring to her eyes. "Mrs. Brennan, I am so sorry." "My husband has carried that grief ever since. He has dedicated his life to ensuring that no other innocent person suffers the way our son did. When he looks at this case, he sees a familiar pattern, a powerful man using the legal system to destroy someone who stands in the way of profit. He will not let it happen again, Miss Hartley, not if the evidence supports innocence. Thank you for telling me this. There is something else. My husband asked me to assist you during the trial. I was a midwife before I married, and I have some medical knowledge. If you need someone to help examine evidence or ask medical questions, I am at your service." The night before the trial, Abigail visited Garrett in his cell one last time. She brought him a good meal, roast chicken and vegetables, fresh bread, and apple pie. They sat on opposite sides of the bars, as close as they could get, and talked quietly. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "Strangely, no. I keep thinking that whatever happens tomorrow, it will be decided by truth, not by fear. That is more than I have ever had before. We are going to win, Garrett. I have the evidence. I have witnesses. Monroe's scheme is going to fall apart. Even if it does not, even if somehow they convict me, I want you to know something." He reached through the bars and took her hand. "These past 3 months, writing to you, knowing you were waiting for me, believing in me, it has changed my life. You gave me hope when I had none. You saw me as a man worth loving when I could barely see myself as human. Whatever happens, that gift is something no one can take away. Nothing is going to happen except justice, Abigail said firmly. Tomorrow we are going to walk out of that courthouse together. And then you are going to ask me a question that you have been waiting 3 months to ask. A smile crossed his face, the first she had seen since his arrest. Is that so? That is so. So you had better survive this trial, Garrett Stone, because I have been practicing my answer, and I am not going to let it go to waste. The courthouse in Cedar Ridge was packed. Word had spread about the case, about the teacher defending the mountain ghost, about the accusations and counter-accusations. Half the town seemed to have turned out to watch. Judge Cornelius Brennan was a stern-looking man in his late 60s.